Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and our special guest today is Dr. Christiane Wolf, and she's here to share with us her new book, Outsmart Your Pain, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion to Help You Leave Chronic Pain Behind. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this?
You know, I have been, so my background is in gynecology and actually oncological gynecology. So that means I've worked with people with chronic pain quite a bit during my medical career. And then when I moved to become a mindfulness teacher and moving more in that world, it just made a lot of sense to really see how these tools can help people with chronic pain. And then so it's like the book is about physical chronic pain, but of course it's also about emotional pain because there's usually such a big overlap.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of an epidemic of that going on right now. There's so many people in pain in one form or another. And I was so impressed how you really merged together the mindfulness, self-compassion with your great medical experience.
Yeah, I think they just go together really well. Although, like, I've been trained as a fixer. That's what the role of the physician is. Usually seen as people come with problems to you and they want you to fix them. And so mindfulness is really giving like the authority back to the person, saying like, no, here's something that you can do, which I as a physician actually can't.
Really empowers people to start taking control. And I know you just start off your book pretty much addressing the opioid epidemic that we're going through right now.
Yes.
How much will this book help people who are in that level of pain?
Actually, so in my experience, like people will often ask, well, will I be able to get off my medication with mindfulness? And I say, like, I honestly don't know, maybe not. But what I've really seen is that a lot of people were able to lower their medication and to be able to tune back in more with their like deep inner knowledge of just like how much do they need, responding to like other things in their environment and just being more tuned into what actually influences their pain levels.
I'm sure you get people that see you that say, okay, I understand you talk about outsmart the pain, but what does it have to do with my brain? Because my pain is real.
That is, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That is a real problem, right? So like it hurts in the body. And then we go to a doctor, and often what happens is they check that out and they say there's nothing wrong with you. Basically meaning like we can't find anything physical. And then they say like go see a pain psychologist or go learn meditate. And I think the way that it is delivered is so dismissive because what the patient hears, it's all in your head, right? And that means is I'm making that up. And it's like really, really important that the pain is real. The pain is real and needs to be taken seriously. And then there's something quite interesting that people often don't know is like all pain is in the brain, right? It's interesting that the body actually does not produce pain. It produces basically just like a warning signal that signals to the brain, pay attention, which is interesting because that's what mindfulness does, is right? Say like, pay attention. So the body signals, pay attention to the brain, and then the brain makes an interpretation to say like, this is dangerous, like, or this is like something I need to pay attention to or not. And so what is really important to know that there's a big difference between acute pain, right? So you step on a nail, let's say, right? That hurts. And there's a big correlation between like how much damage there is in that moment in acute pain and the pain level. And then the chronic pain is, that's actually not often that much correlation between the tissue damage and the level of the pain that people are in, right? And that is important for folks to know because we're so used from the acute pain that basically if I'm in a lot of pain right now, that means there must be a lot of damage. And that is not true for chronic pain. And so we have to actually approach chronic pain in a very different way. And the good thing really is because chronic pain is influenced by so many different things that those are all things we can work with. Those are all things we can work with.
Well, that's very encouraging, I'm sure, for many people, because at least there's like a middle ground. Because I think sometimes people would feel like, gosh, okay, either I'm not in pain or I'm in a lot of pain. There's no gray area in between.
Yes. And the thing with chronic pain is that then this is again like where we come to like you outsmart your pain, you actually outsmart your brain because the brain learns pain. And so it tries to basically, well intended, to detect pain even sooner and make pain out of sometimes just memories. And so that is why like people with chronic pain get more and more sensitive to any kind of pain stimuli, which is actually really tragic, right? Because it's just instead of just like going away, it often feels for folks that the pain is getting worse.
Well, and I noticed one of the things I was real impressed with is that I know in LA you teach teachers and just you train people on mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I know while that term may be used quite a bit, there's still a lot of people asking, gosh, what is that?
Yeah. So what we're training people in is really so mindfulness. Mindfulness is really being present with what is. And it gets quite confusing because it feels like so many people, at least in LA, are meditating now. And meditation is just a generic term, just like exercise. So if somebody says I'm meditating, that tells me as much as if somebody says I'm exercising. That is like, okay, that's great, but what is it that you actually do? And then people think, or like when they meditate, it's supposed to make them feel relaxed. But the truth is really that what we're learning with mindfulness is to see things as they are, to be present with what is here, and to be present with that in an open and curious and friendly way. And to see how we are often, and especially with the things that we don't like, which is completely understandable, like we're very reactive, right? We're spacing out, we're avoiding, or we are just reacting to being like frustrated by raising our voices or doing all kinds of things that are actually not helpful. And so mindfulness helps us to just see that, see like, oh, so when I read that email or when like that person talks to me, I notice like how my chest gets tight, right? Or my heart rate rises and I have the impulse to say something or to write a snarky email. And mindfulness can really help with just seeing that and then deciding is the right thing to do right now, right? So we are inviting more spaciousness really, and also more wisdom into something that sometimes doesn't feel so wise.
What do you think is the number one question people ask you when they start working with you in regards to how to deal with their pain?
I mean, probably like, will my pain go away? Or can this get rid of my pain? And the answer is, again, like sometimes I've seen pains really disappear through mindfulness and self-compassion practices, but more often than not, because pain or chronic pain is such a multi-functional thing, right? That it most likely will not go away, but you can still like live a full and happy and meaningful and joyful life despite the pain that might not go away. And that
I
is
think,
very empowering, right? It's
mhm.
empowering when people start to really embrace that and they're not, or they're moving away from this sense is like, if that pain doesn't go away, basically my life is over. Or I can't live like a happy and joyful and meaningful life because I have that pain. So it's like, yeah, of course, we hope that the pain will go away and you do everything that you can to make it go away. But in the meantime, right? In the meantime, like don't forget to, or don't overlook to really live your life to the fullest.
Do you feel that people also will like really identify with their pain in a way that almost becomes their identity?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, like, so we have the term in medicine that is called like secondary gain. And it means like, well, if you're sick, some people will really gain from that. So people take care of you, or you have to do less work, right? And so sometimes in an usually unconscious way, we really gain from that and we don't want to let go of that anymore. But more often what happens is that anything that we experience on an ongoing basis, we will start to identify with that. And then we start to look through this identification as if we had colored glasses on, right? So then we start to say things like, well, people with my kind of pain, right? Or people like me don't. And in a way, so our life becomes smaller and smaller because that is at some point becomes like one of the main lenses that we look through. And so with mindfulness, we can just say like, well, there's pain here right now, right? Instead of saying like, I am the person with pain, because when I'm saying that, it usually also really implies this is who I am. This won't change, right? So it has something a lot more solid and a lot more implications as if I say right now, it's like this.
Yeah, I know some people who have done things where they're like, well, you ask them how they're doing and they talk to you about what pain they're going through, which they seem to over-identify. And I'm not dismissing that, but it just seems that there's this, that's part of their identity completely.
Yes, yes, yes. Right. And again, like the mind does that with everything that we spend a lot of like mental time with. And often that's really beautiful. Like you identify with being a parent, or you identify with being a runner, or you identify with being like whatever your profession is, right? But then it can really get in the way when we're just being that, right? And especially because being like a patient with pain is so limiting and feels so tight, right? So that kind of deepens this kind of cycle of pain and often actually makes the pain worse because we're then expecting the pain, right? We don't even expect anything else, and we really just start to see the world through that lens or that angle.
Yeah, that kind of becomes our story then.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, big time. Big
Mm.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
mhm,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh no, and that is actually something that I find like working with people, or people find really, really helpful, is to make them aware of like what I call the pain story. And the way that that works is, so in mindfulness, like regardless whether we work with pain or not, like we have this saying, like as soon as you close your eyes, your mind is busy either rehashing the past or rehearsing the future. It's barely ever here, right? And then I think you might be able to relate to that. Like, so when you drive to work, where's your mind? Not in the car. It's like everywhere else. But, right, then we're hardly ever here. But then what happens when we have chronic pain? So let's say you have a flare up or you feel something in the body. So with people with chronic pain, what usually happens automatically is we have the past pain story pop up. And the past pain story is like everything that happened in relationship to that pain up to this point, right? Like why you have that, why you shouldn't have it, what went wrong, like the doctors that you saw, those that were helpful, those that were not. And so that's the past. And that makes you feel a particular way, which your body feels right now in this moment, right? And then often at the same time, the mind also goes into the future. It says like, oh, if it's like this right now, I wonder what's going to be like this afternoon or tomorrow or next week or in a year, right? And then all the worry that comes from that. And then the body also, where we also feel that right now on top of what is here in this moment. Right. And I've had that actually many, many times where people, when I ask them, if you could just drop like the past story, just for a moment, just imagine like you can access it, and you drop like the future story for a moment, you imagine you can't access it, and you're just with what is here right now, then people go like, huh. That's an interesting thought experiment, right? And then they go like, well, what does that feel like right now? And very often what they notice is that what is here right now in this moment is actually not that bad, right? And this is something that everybody can do, right? So when you're feeling really overwhelmed or thinking like, oh God, all the things that I have to do, and then you just pause and say like, so what's here really right now, right? So you drop the past for a moment and you drop the future for a moment. They're not going anywhere, so you can just play with that and then go like, how am I feeling right now? And very often what you hear people say like, oh, I'm okay, right? Or it's not that bad, or there's a sense of a relief. And so that can be like a very, very powerful practice. When people start to realize that, because they walk through their day and go like, okay, am I caught in the past pain story or am I caught in the future pain story right now?
That's really impressive when people are in the actual moment, being present in the moment and checking in. I really like that, because then it really kind of identifies like, where am I at today, and where am I at with my feelings? Where do I feel it in my body?
Exactly. And you start to also see is like, what is the effect if you're dwelling in the past, right? Because the body is always in the present moment. So the body can only feel it right now because the body doesn't know time, right? The body has no idea. And we know this, like if we're thinking about it, let's say like an upsetting conversation that we had, right? And we were just fine. And suddenly we remember that, and bam, don't we feel that in the body right now? Even though that conversation is gone, like that was yesterday or sometimes years ago, right? And so when we start to really pay attention to that, we really wonder, do I need to do that to myself? And it's not that we want to stop thoughts or we don't want to learn from the past or like plan about the future. That's not what it is about at all. It's just the amount of time that we're spending there.
My goodness. I mean, Dr. Wolf, that is just, I think it really is helpful for people to kind of slow down and get to that place, where they're really mindful of the moment. How does self-compassion dovetail with all of this?
Oh, yeah. Self-compassion is quite a buzzword right now, at least in my world. And it's like, so what self-compassion actually means is like to become a better friend to yourself, right? And what many, many people experience, and I definitely was one of them or still working on that, is just like I could be very kind and compassionate to pretty much everybody else except to myself. Right, that I have higher standards for myself. I have quite an inner critic quite relentless, that's criticizing everything, and I could do better, or I could work more, or like, why did I say that? So that kind of stuff, right? But what happens if we're again just looking like from a physiological point of view, it's a little bit as if somebody would say that to you. And like what I just used the examples, they're very mild examples, right? A lot of people say like, wow, I would never say out loud to anybody else what I'm saying to myself or what I call myself. I wouldn't have any friends probably. But the body again feels the effect of that self-talk. Right. And it's understandable. We have learned to talk to ourselves in that way. I mean, that's kind of our culture is you work harder, you try harder, you do it again. I mean, you suck it up. Like all these messages that we have been given, right? And it makes us internally really stressed and tense and really afraid of making mistakes, honestly, or even trying something new because we're afraid of making a mistake, right? And so self-compassion is really like what we would need to hear from like a dear friend who really understands what we're going through. And sometimes it's just like, it's a hug, right? Or it's like a squeeze of the hand or like somebody looking at us in a compassionate way or saying like, you have a hard day, right? Or this is really difficult right now. And then when we hear that and we can really receive that, then something in us softens, right? And something says like, oh, thank you. Yes, it's really hard right now. And that moment gives a moment of relief. And so with self-compassion, we learn to offer this kind of support to ourselves. And it's really, really, because like sometimes it's like there's nothing we can do. If we're really struggling, if we're really in pain, if something really horrible happened, there are no fixes, right? That's just the way it is right now. And if we feel that there is somebody, would be lovely if there would always be a person for us there, right? But then our internal climate is also important. And if we can internally just like turn to ourselves and say like, oh, honey, I know this is really hard, right? Then it in a way sometimes makes it from unbearable to somehow bearable, if that makes sense.
It does, because it's, you look at this and it's really interesting. Why don't you share with us your thoughts on this as far as with people that you see, do you find that the emotional pain is something that really goes undealt with, that you bring, you work with them on more so than the actual chronic pain?
Yeah, I mean, it's the emotional part of chronic pain. It's so interwoven, and it's something that I really feel has been neglected in the medical field so much, right? We've been focusing so much on that there's something wrong with the body, and when we fix that, everything will be fine, right? And what we're seeing really more and more is like how interwoven our emotional life is with our physical life, right? And this is a huge topic, but like we know that, for example, people who had like what's called like adverse childhood events, right? So there are big studies around that, just like looking at, so what happened to children and then how do they cope with life later, and to look at like their health, their mental health, their physical health. And what we find, unfortunately, is that the harder basically the childhood was, right, the more prone we are later to chronic illness and to chronic pain, right? And this is a lot, like we're often thinking about trauma as like physical abuse or sexual abuse, but emotional abuse or even emotional neglect, like not having gotten what you needed as a child as far as like love and care and interaction with adults is involved, right? So that has an influence on our internal climate, right? And because emotions are so closely linked also to our stress system, right? So like many of us carry really this huge loads of chronic stress, which we're sometimes not even aware of, because that's the water that we swim in, and we don't know it any other way, right? And so to really start to look or include kind of emotional health and how we work with emotions, deal with emotions, hold emotions, I feel is a really key component on how we can really lower chronic physical pain.
So are you saying that like if we work on the emotional pain, sometimes the physical pain will kind of disappear?
Maybe not disappear, but it will soften. It will soften. The flare-ups are not as strong, right? So often people with chronic pain, they know like what triggers a flare-up, and anything stress-related is usually in that area. And what stresses us often are like our relationships, how we're feeling about our relationships, like how much we feel seen, how much we feel appreciated, like all these things. And if we can work with that in a really in a kind and respectful and compassionate way, like then yes, the overall like pain levels will go down. And that of course includes our emotional pain levels. And it also includes, this is really important, this piece is like, there are studies that show with mindfulness practice that for some people, like the objective, whatever that is, pain levels are maybe not going down so much, but the quality of life of people goes up, right? And I find that so hopeful, because what that means is, right, so you can have coming back to what I said earlier, you can have a really fulfilled and joyful and meaningful life and have pain. Right? And you can have that right now while the pain is still here. And of course, while you still work at getting to the core of what that pain is about and how to heal it.
What do you find to be the most difficult feeling to address?
The most difficult, there are two. So one is like shame is always, or for most people, the most difficult feeling to feel or admit or work with. And it comes up quite a bit with like feeling ashamed for the body that isn't functioning in the way it's supposed to be, right? And this is even more so for younger people who feel like, what's wrong with my body, right? Or I'm looking healthy, but I'm not. I have like these huge pain levels. And so there's a lot of shame around that. And the other one is really grief. And grief is a tricky one. As I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and we had that discussion about like our society has not learned how to grieve. Like we're not doing well with grief in general. And so, and around pain, what people often feel, so the grief is there because it's an emotion and it just arises, right? And we suppress it because a lot of people feel that if they would open to the grief, they would acknowledge defeat, right? So if I'm grieving that, let's say, I can't go on hikes anymore in the way that I used to, right? If I would grieve that, in a way, I make it real. And I think there's a little bit of magical thinking in that too. And then, of course, nobody wants to feel grief. So it's like, let's just get away from that. So yeah, those I think are the probably the two hardest feelings to be with.
Do you find that people will kind of numb out and sometimes move into addictive behavior because they just don't want to deal with the pain?
Oh, of course. Yeah. And it's, I mean, I don't blame anybody, honestly. I mean, it's just like the pain, like we don't want to be in pain. And if we have a way that works for us to numb the pain, right? And addictive behavior, I mean, there's so many ways where we can avoid. I mean, like, there's some people say like all addictive behavior is like trying to not feel the pain, whether it's physical pain or whether it's emotional pain. So if we would just look at like one of my colleagues, he has this saying that he says like, because we often look at people with addiction saying like, well, there's something wrong with them, like their willpower isn't strong enough, or it's genetic, right? And they basically can't do anything about it. But instead of having this approach of just like, what's wrong with you, is to really sit with them and ask like, what happened to you? And I really love that, right? Because it is so much more respectful and saying like, yes, of course, like we use whatever we can in order to not feel pain that would feel completely overwhelming otherwise.
Is it because people just don't have the life skills, in order to really address their pain, and that's why this information is so important?
Do you mean about addictive behavior or?
About behavior where they can get into mindfulness and self-compassion and really start learning about how to deal with pain, either emotional or physical.
I mean, I think like everybody with chronic pain, emotional or physical pain, I would recommend that they try mindfulness and self-compassion. I'm not saying it's for everyone. I don't think there's anything that is for everyone, honestly. But I really wish more people would have this information, right? Because it is really self-empowering. And it also, I mean, the thing is, it works on the chronic pain, but it actually works on our life stress. So how we are living our lives in general, right? And for most of us, we have like a too high stressed life, and it's just really useful for that on a very broad, arena.
Where do you feel that people get stuck in when they're trying to work on mindfulness and self-compassion?
I think they get stuck in this idea that, some people just go like, oh, they read about mindfulness and the great research that is out there, and they say, oh, I'm going to do that. And then they approach it the way they approach everything, by just trying really hard and working really hard. And then they get stuck in like noticing you can't force this, right? You can't force rest. You can't force to slow down. You can't force kindness. You can't force compassion. And so it's this very paradoxical thing, right? So we have this saying, like in this practice, the fastest way to get from A to B is to be actually fully at A. And that is something that people really wrestle with in the beginning, because they so badly want to be at B.
Yeah, they really want to make that quick jump, and
yes.
It takes work.
Yes. Exactly. It takes work in a different way, right? It doesn't take work in the try harder, try again, right? So what we usually do, but it's more like a relaxing into this whole thing about like, how can we be with something instead of do all the time? And that's really, really hard for most of us.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Right. Well, and it's interesting because I'm sure you get people who say, okay, I want to dive into my feelings and be in the present moment and give myself self-compassion, but I don't want to have my emotions run away. I'm afraid that they're just going to take over.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, that's a huge concern that people have, right? And that is something that we often have learned as children. We have learned it's not okay to have feelings. It's not okay to show our feelings. So what we have learned to suppress it. And then sometimes they just break through. And we let, not only as children, like we see that in a lot of adults, there's nothing, and then they explode, right? And you go like, whoa. And so what we're actually learning here is the emotions themselves are never the problem, right? We think like anger is the problem. Anger is not the problem. Violence is the problem, right? And what we are training, and this is just amazing, we totally can train that to say like, well, can I be aware of the anger, where that is in my body, of the impulses that come from that, and not act on it, right? So we're taking responsibility. We're not saying like, it's my fault that I have those emotions, because emotions are just a response to life and our environment, right? It's just like when I hear a sound, I cannot make myself not hear a sound. That's just what's here. So if there's something in the environment and an emotion is arising, that's the function of an emotion. It gives me information about what happens in my environment, right? And so that is, it will just arise. But my responsibility is to what I'm doing with that. And that is really like one of the skills that people really, really get better with both the practices of mindfulness and self-compassion. And it's not going to work overnight.
Well, just like anything, we practice,
Yes.
We don't get on a motorcycle and learn how to ride it the first day. We have to do a little practice,
Exactly. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, and I have to say, I was so impressed with your book, Outsmart Your Pain, because I think a lot of times when people think about that, they don't really equate the emotional aspect to it. They think, oh, it's just going to be the physical stuff. And you really dive into the emotional aspect. It's just beautifully done in this book.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Wolf, what would you like our listeners to take away, from your book and from the work that you do?
I think really to empower people to say that you have so much more power in your healing journey than you might have thought so far, right? These practices, these skills are really learnable if you just take it slow, do small steps, keep at it, just like with exercise or healthy eating, right? Same thing. And you can really live your life, honestly, a lot happier and a lot more at ease than you might think you can.
And that's so empowering, especially when we get to a place where pain, we're just feeling the pain, whatever the pain is.
Yeah. And again, it's like so natural that we want the pain to go away. And we often don't consider it's like what we ourselves can actually do to help modulate that.
Yeah, it's really just like life skills people can learn to work through or work with what they've got going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
My goodness, Dr. Wolf. I mean, we could talk forever. I loved your book. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about all the things you do?
Yeah, I mean, my website, which is just my name, so www.christianewolf.com. And I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. So if people are on social media, they can follow me there too.
Well, Dr. Wolf, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you. That was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wolf. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Outsmart Your Pain. Outsmart Your Pain's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and every place books are sold. And if you don't find it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, support our indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.